Welcome to the OK Let's Learn podcast. This is two podcasts in one where we dive into great books and stories, and one where we just learn about tons of different topics and people. My name is Kevin O'Keefe. So, today, let's learn about February's top moments and people. Yes, it's February, and it's time to celebrate this amazing month by going through not necessarily the best, because influential moments aren't always good. Good and bad, people that were born that shaped our history, who we are as people on the globe today, everything. And yes, I'm going to miss a lot, no question. But this is just one man's opinion. It can spark, obviously, conversation, and that's the idea. I hope you find it entertaining. I had a blast going through this. And I will say this up front. I have an audience throughout the world. So I'm here in the United States. I'm in New Jersey. So there will be a slant towards, obviously, events and people that were born here in the United States. And we will touch on ancient history. So, when you think of February, again, here in the United States, what are the things that come to mind? Groundhog Day, right away. I teach elementary school. You got to go with that. Then, of course, Valentine's Day. Everyone here in the United States celebrates and gets cards in the classroom. It's an annual wonderful event for little kids and, of course, for adults. You've got President's Day. Here in the United States, Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. We celebrate the two famous presidents that impacted the history of our country. We have, obviously, Black History Month. And then very end of the month, we've got that extra day that we add on once every 4 years, February 29th. And what a month it is when you got most months that end in 30 days and 31. All of a sudden, February throws us a curveball. And of course, here, again, United States, in Jersey where I am, it's cold. You're smack in the middle of the winter. So before we get into the countdown, let's just look at some interesting people that have birthdays in February. Kurt Cobain, the instrumental musician that kind of launched alternative rock, the lead singer of Nirvana, passed away too early. You got John Travolta, Jennifer Aniston, Clark Gable. Yes, we're talking about cultural references out there. Farrah Fawcett, Stevie Wonder, and Elizabeth Taylor. Honorable mention, before we hit the top 20. We're talking about ancient history here. Joan of Arc, on February 22nd, 1431, was executed. She was a martyr, a symbol of French national identity and courage, as, yes, a woman early in history that became famous. And we had a really interesting point in time in history. Galileo, on February 26, 1616, he was admonished, brought before the Catholic Church in Rome for, get this, teaching the concept that the Earth actually orbited around the sun. It actually took the Catholic Church until 1992 to formally apologize for making him recant this amazing scientific discovery. So much of history has been this push-pull in terms of ultimately institutions that are in power, in this case, the Catholic Church, and the advance of science, looking at things that are not necessarily black and white, the scientific discovery, trying to figure out our world around us without it being dictated to us. Talk about something that clearly was influential with these early scientists trying to navigate their work. So let's get into our top 20. Number 20, yes, February 2nd, 1887, it's Groundhog Day. Every year on the 2nd of February, Americans, especially in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, look to a groundhog to predict the remaining weeks of winter. So, will that groundhog see its shadow? 19. St. Valentine's Day, right? The tradition of Valentine's Day goes back to February 14th in the year 269. It commemorates St. Valentine, a Roman priest who, according to tradition, was martyred on February 14th for actually performing marriages against the Emperor Claudius II's wishes. Over time, this became a celebration, obviously, of love, cards, flowers, chocolate, you name it. But ultimately, according to legend, like I said, it goes back to this Roman emperor, Claudius II. He had trouble enlisting men to join his army. And believe it or not, he blamed it on their attachment to their wives and children. So solve that problem. He banned all weddings and engagements. And this priest, like I mentioned, Valentine, defied the law and continued to perform the marriages anyway. When Claudius heard about this, he had Valentine arrested and, yes, beheaded. So, yes, ultimately, it's a good holiday, but it goes back to something that was horrible that happened, apparently. 18, you talk about things that are not good, because remember, this list is about influential moments, both good and bad. On February 26, 1993, the World Trade Center was bombed. It was obviously the first bombing. It was a rental truck that was parked in an underground garage. 6 people passed away and over 1,000 were wounded. This obviously foreshadowed the later tragedies that ultimately happened on February 11th, 2001. But it was a warning here to us in the United States, and I specifically remember this time period. It was a year after our son was born, actually 6 months after our son was born, and right here close to us in New Jersey. 17, we're going for 2 pop culture huge events. Number 1, February 4th, 1938, Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs premiered. It was a huge risk that Walt Disney pretty much put up all of his fortunes, all of his monies, to actually have a movie be a cartoon, but it set Walt Disney, the company, on its way to be the dominant presence throughout the world for entertainment. And then February 9th, 1964, are you kidding me? The day rock and roll ultimately became a reality and launched so many bands. Talk about influential moments. The Beatles, they made their debut on the Ed Sullivan Show. It was actually one of the largest TV audiences of that time. And like I said, it just launched. Rock and roll, no doubt. 16, Michael Jordan, the famous basketball player, was born on February 17th, 1963. He's a year younger than me. He was actually born in Brooklyn, New York, and yes, one of the greatest basketball players of all time. And it's not just his play on the court. You just watch highlights of this gentleman, and he just could do things with the basketball that really, in my opinion, no one has ever done and probably will ever do. But he ultimately shaped the sports culture worldwide with his sneakers, with launching and having Nike go through the stratosphere, and, just basically having basketball be a worldwide phenomenon. 15, we've got 2 icons. We're going to stay with sports. In this month, Hank Aaron and Babe Ruth were born. We'll start with Babe Ruth, February 6th, 1895. And yes, baseball was floundering. It wasn't fun. It was just hitting balls here and there in the infield, little pop-ups. And then comes along this gentleman that hit booming bombs out of the stadiums, the home run, became something that now was a fact of life in this amazing American sport. And the popularity of baseball just took off with this larger than life character. Really, the first, like I said, not just baseball superstar, but really one of the first true American sports superstars. Hank Aaron. He was born on February 5th, 1934. And yeah, 714 home runs. That's how many Babe Ruth hit in his career. And Hank Aaron comes along, especially coming out of the 60s into the 70s and then into the 80s. He actually ended up hitting more home runs than Babe Ruth, 755. And if you were my age, my generation, you remember where you were. Certainly if you were a sports fan, the night he hit 715, it was just an amazing accomplishment. But more than anything else, what he did was advance the cause of African Americans. He weathered so many hostilities as he was going up and month by month, day by day, coming close to actually hitting more home runs than the Big Babe. So he was an amazing individual. He's passed away. But why was he amazing? Again, he's on this list because he was influential. He hit home runs, but more than anything else, he advanced the cause of civil rights at a time, yes, coming out of the civil rights legislations in the 60s, coming into the 70s was 1974 when he hit home run number 715. And it was just a reckoning that our country was coming to. Yes, that going back to our country's founding, that all men are created equal. I remember distinctly, in 1974, I was 12 years old, and I ended up reading a book by George Plimpton at the time, and it really made a big impact on me. It was basically about the lead up to hitting 714, and while it should have been a momentous, wonderful time in his life, he looked back on it with, unfortunately, not a lot of joy. I'll remember distinctly a part of the book was Hank Aaron opening up these boxes that he would keep of all these hate letters he would be receiving. So again, going back to our theme, that this list is not necessarily all great moments, but influential moments. Number 14, the Scream painting was stolen on February 12th, 1994. Talk about interesting. And ultimately, you can argue that a lot of the paintings, the famous paintings, this definitely goes back to the Mona Lisa, ended up becoming so famous because they were stolen. The Mona Lisa was famously stolen. And here on this date, this painting called The Scream, if it doesn't ring any bells, just Google the picture. You will know it. The painting was done by Edvard Munch, and it was in this National Gallery in Oslo. In broad daylight, they cut it off the wall in about 50 seconds, and they actually wrote a note taunting the security, like how easy it was. It ended up becoming recovered later, but it clearly highlighted that, you know what, as with a recent theft at the Louvre in France, our societies, our countries, we need to protect our valuable assets. Number 13, the blizzard in 1978. I distinctly remember it. I mean, New York City got 18 inches of snow, but where I was, we got, I grew up in Poughkeepsie, New York. North Jersey, Poughkeepsie, New York, we got upwards of 30 inches of snow. It just paralyzed the whole Northeast. It was a huge event. And yes, believe it or not, this will segue nice with number 12, Time Magazine launching at the very end of February in 1923. I say this because my big memory is the cover on Time Magazine. It cannot be overstated. You know, Time Magazine, Newsweek here in the United States, that was the internet, especially with just getting the news out. And yes, it was a compilation. It was once a week, but you would get that in the mailbox and you would be assured of being able to catch up on the news. Yes, you had influential newspapers that are still around today. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, but ultimately Time Magazine set the scene, in my opinion, for so much of what was culturally happening, mostly here, obviously, in the United States, but throughout the world. Number 11, Frederick Douglass is born February 14th, 1818. Originally born as Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey. He was a slave that escaped and became one of the most powerful people in the country. He was an abolitionist, he was a writer, and just really did an amazing job in terms of propelling the movements of emancipation and equal rights. Number 10, the raising of the flag on Iwo Jima on February 23rd, 1945. This was on top of this mountain, Mount Suribachi, in this volcanic island that's south in the Pacific Ocean, south of mainland Japan. Listen, obviously, it's an iconic photo. If you haven't seen it, Google it. It was Americans raising the flag on top of this mountain that ultimately became the symbol of our defeat of Japan in World War II. But like I said, anytime during war you have innocent civilians that ended up passing away, nothing about war is good. But certainly from an American perspective, this was an iconic photograph. Number 9, the King Tut's tomb was discovered on February 16th, 1923. This British archaeologist, Howard Carter, announced the discovery of this intact tomb on Tutankhamun, King Tut, in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. It really electrified everything about history, Egypt, the pharaohs of Egypt, and really brought the idea about how important archaeology is to the masses. And it's still out there today, and everyone is still fascinated by what ultimately this gentleman found on this day. Number 8, Copernicus was born February 19th, 1473. And along with Galileo, listen, in case you're not familiar with this gentleman, he proposed something radical. That no, the earth is not the center of the universe. The sun is at the center, and the earth moves around the sun. This was called the heliocentric model. He also said that, hey, the earth spins once a day, which explains day and night. The earth orbits the sun once a year, which explains the seasons. And the stars, they're really far away, and that's why ultimately they seem fixed in the sky. At the time, this wasn't just something shocking. This was revolutionary. This was about people looking at where we were in our universe being completely different, right? Instead of, like I said, the earth being the center of everything, he showed us that this planet was one of many, and you know what? We're not alone. And talk about it being influential. He set up the idea that challenged the prevailing thoughts of the day, got him in a lot of trouble as well, right? These were revolutionary people. And yes, he encouraged people to use math, observation, reasoning, and he opened the door for future scientists like I talked about before with Galileo and ultimately Isaac Newton. So now, number 7, again, talk about influential. On February 15th, 1946, the ENIAC, the Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer, was unveiled at the University of Pennsylvania. It was the world's first large-scale, fully electronic, programmable computer, and certainly, you talk about changing the world. It laid the groundwork for all the modern computing that we have here today, a technological revolution. More recent, number 6, Facebook is launched on February 4th, 2004. The jury is still out, but regardless of who dominates in the future, this company launched by Mark Zuckerberg from his Harvard dorm room. It started as a way to get to know kids throughout a college campus, right? But ultimately today, it's a global social media platform that has pretty much changed and reshaped everything about how we communicate, our politics, business, and ultimately how people see each other, our personal relationships worldwide. Seismic change, no doubt. All right, so we're up to the top 5. And I'm not going to give this in any particular order. I will just throw out there the top 5, in my opinion, most influential moments in February, and we can make the judgment just because it's too controversial. Ultimately, how can you pick one? But in my opinion, these are the top 5. So like I said, in no particular order, Thomas Edison. He was born on February 11th, 1847. Arguably our greatest inventor, from the light bulb to the phonograph. He transformed everyday life and ushered in the industrial age. Think about electricity and the light bulb. Are you kidding me? If we didn't have that today. February 4th, 1913, Rosa Parks is born. Ultimately, the civil rights era began the day that she refused to give up her bus seat, that ultimately brought Martin Luther King Jr. on the scene. And you know what? Her life embodied everything about the struggle for racial equality and just the dignity of being a human being. And piggybacking on that, here in February, both the 13th Amendment and the 15th Amendment were established. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery, and the 15th Amendment secured voting rights regardless of your race. These constitutional milestones reshaped everything about who we are as a country, our democracy, and equality. And then the last one I'll mention, no doubts, is we celebrate President's Day. Why? Because George Washington was born on February 22nd, 1732, and Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12th, 1809. Both of these presidents, I think, arguably most Americans would agree, George Washington was responsible more than any other individual for establishing us as a country independent of Great Britain. And then Abraham Lincoln, years later, ended up keeping our country together and getting us through the Civil War. Friends, thanks for staying with me on this journey of the 20 most influential moments of people that were born and certainly events that happened. Reach out to me at kevmok21@gmail.com. You can also go to the Facebook group, OK Let's Learn, which is linked in the comments and the podcast notes from this episode. And definitely, if you are so inclined, having a review is great, 5-star review. And if you could post a nice narrative, if you like the podcast, even better. So until next time, have fun and keep learning.